I had no idea what Dad saw in you sometimes, Helen grumbled. Her voice sliced through the silence of the kitchen like a sharp blade. You can't even seem to handle cleaning up after yourself. I stopped dead, the coffee cup I was holding suspended in midair. The dirty dishes in the sink weren't mine. I hadn't even had anything to eat yet, but I pushed down the snappy comeback that was forming in my mouth. Arguing with Helen never turned out okay. I go by Julia, and I'm 25 years old. It's been half a year since my dad died suddenly, which made me the only person to inherit all the things he had worked so tirelessly to achieve. I've been living with Helen, who was his wife for a decade, because, honestly, it felt like the correct decision. My dad really loved her, and I desired to maintain some connection to him. Being an only child and with my mom gone ever since I was 12, I figured we could work through our sadness together. But Helen didn't want someone to mourn with, she wanted to be in charge. Initially, I attributed her mean words to her being stressed out. My dad's death had been difficult for the both of us. She had taken me into her home following the funeral, claiming that it was what he would have wanted. Though, as the weeks became months, her real personality started to become clear. Small comments regarding what I wore, how I spent my days, and even the books I was reading became something that happened nearly every day. Your dad always believed you spent too much time lost in your own thoughts, she might mention with a sly smile. Or, it's no shock that you don't have a boyfriend. I wondered who could ever be attracted to someone as messy as that, and it wasn't just empty talk either. Little incidents began to occur throughout the house. My treasured coffee cup vanished out of nowhere, only to resurface later, broken into pieces in the garbage can. The temperature control would be dialed way down, so the house was frigid, and Helen would insist she hadn't touched a thing. Still, I reasoned with myself that it wasn't worth causing a scene. Helen had been married to my dad for 10 years. It had to be that she had some redeeming qualities if he had loved her. Didn't she? That morning, as Helen shut a cupboard hard, mumbling to herself, I started to consider the possibility that I was mistaken. The atmosphere felt more strained as the day progressed. Later on, I overheard her talking on the phone, her tone hushed and curt. "I already said we'll talk when she's out of the picture," she spat, before going into her bedroom and slamming the door. A knot formed in my stomach. Could I be the subject of the conversation? I pushed the notion aside, trying to convince myself that I was letting my imagination run wild, but the unsettling feeling stayed with me, a faint inner voice suggesting that something was off. I'd always been the reserved one as a child. My dad and I had become partners after my mom died, just the two of us taking on life's challenges. To ensure that I had everything I needed, he worked tirelessly, and I did everything I could to make him feel like a proud father. I dedicated myself to school, stayed out of trouble, and never caused him any grief. I was 15 when my dad first met Helen. Initially, she struck me as a good person, always with a friendly smile and always laughing at the jokes my dad told. Seeing him with somebody other than my mom wasn't the simplest thing, but more than anything, I wished for his happiness. She seemed to introduce an element of joy back into his life that had been missing ever since my mom passed, and that was good enough in my book. Once they tied the knot, though, things started to go downhill. After Helen came to live with us, I began to see how she'd make these little digs, always hiding them with an overly sweet tone. Like, "Oh, Julia, you're so bright, but don't you think you ought to put more effort into your social life?" Or, "Your dad mentions how self-sufficient you are, but we could all use a little refinement." I just brushed off her remarks, figuring they weren't a big deal. Now, as I sit here in what was once supposed to be my safe place, her words are cutting me like sharp blades. After he died, everything my dad had strived to achieve, this home, his savings, his company, ended up being left to me. It wasn't that he didn't have feelings for Helen, he just wanted to make sure I was taken care of financially. He was under the impression she would treat me right and continue to care for me as if I were her own daughter. I really wanted to respect his wishes, but Helen didn't seem to feel the same way. Even prior to my moving in, she definitely communicated her displeasure with the situation. "It's going to take some getting used to on both our parts," is what she told me with this forced smile. "But I'm aware this is how your father would have liked things to play out. Reciting here has been less about adapting and more about surviving some kind of ongoing assessment." Helen made all the decisions, handling the payments, the meals, even the way the rooms were set up. I tried to lend a hand, but my ideas were constantly dismissed. You wouldn't grasp the demands of managing a home, she would declare, her voice heavy with disdain. Despite everything, I remained, with the hope that things would improve. I kept thinking that Helen was simply in mourning, and that she was attempting to deal with things in her own manner. The late-night conversations, the biting comments, the way she regarded me as if I was a houseguest who had overstayed their welcome, I did my best to pay no mind to them. But now that my father has passed away, it appears the remaining family that I have is drifting further away. I attempted to grasp onto the remnants, but it seemed as though Helen was determined to obliterate them. That nagging sense of unease I felt before returned. I couldn't stop thinking about that hushed conversation Helen had on the phone. "We can talk when she's not here anymore. Where is she going?" It began as a slight doubt, like a piece of wood wedged inside my head. Even though Helen had always been quick to make harsh remarks and boss people around, it felt like her actions recently were somehow different, more planned, more ominous. While I sat at the table, just moving my food around, I could not stop replaying the mysterious phone call I had overheard earlier. "You seem quiet tonight," Helen stated, her tone strangely happy. Her eyes studied me intently, a fake smile stretched over her face. "Just weary," I responded softly, offering a weak smile back. Her stare lingered for a bit longer before she looked at her wine. "It is important that you get plenty of sleep. You haven't seemed yourself recently." That statement affected me more deeply than it probably should have. To be honest, she was right. I had been feeling under the weather for the last several weeks. Weariness, queasiness, throbbing head pain. I had dismissed it as simply being stressed, although the timing of it all bothered me. The initial symptoms had appeared relatively soon after I moved into this place. That evening, not able to ignore the persistent feeling of anxiety, I resolved to take a look around Helen's bedroom. She had gone out to run a last-minute chore, so I had a little while to myself. I wasn't thrilled with the idea of secretly investigating, but something deep inside me insisted that I needed to find out the truth. I began by searching through her desk. The documents were precisely piled, and her penmanship was precise. Invoices, slips, a couple of private correspondences, nothing unusual. Then, my attention was drawn to her computer, which was left without a password. My inquisitiveness took over. I accessed her inbox and abruptly felt my stomach clench. One email chain really caught my eye, a dialogue between her and a person with the name Paul. The subject stated what's next. I tapped on it, my fingers shaking. "Paul. Is she still around? I figured you would have dealt with this by now. Helen, like I mentioned previously. These kinds of things require a bit of patience. Lay off me with the pressure. This has to look perfect. Paul, we don't have the luxury of time. The deadline is approaching. Just get it done." My veins turned ice cold. I fixated on the screen, my heartbeat escalating rapidly. Who exactly was Paul? What was their scheme? I continued going down, taking short, shallow breaths as I went through each new text. The messages became more direct. Mentions of the cash, the property, and frighteningly, taking her out of the picture. A sudden feeling of sickness washed over me, and I grabbed onto the desk to keep my balance. It was clear now that I wasn't simply being overly suspicious. It had become apparent that Helen and Paul were conspiring to harm me. After powering down the laptop, I exited her room, my thoughts spinning. All those little remarks, all those odd actions suddenly made sense. More than just disliking me, Helen actually wanted me out of the picture. I retreated to my own room, making sure to lock the door. Looking at the dim light from my phone screen, I realized what I had to do immediately. Helen believed she held all the cards, but she had clearly underestimated my resolve. My life was tied to this house, not just hers, and I fully intended to defend it. The following morning, the sounds of silverware and plates woke me. Helen was already up and about, humming a slightly out-of-tune song as she busied herself in the kitchen. My stomach twisted, not because I was hungry, but from the weight of the previous night's revelation. Acting rashly was not an option. Whatever plot Helen and Paul had hatched, it was already underway. Showing my cards prematurely could cost me the chance to thwart their plans. While sitting on my bed, I began browsing my phone. The emails I had previously read were burned into my memory, though they alone were not enough. What I needed was concrete evidence, some undeniable truth to present to the police. The morning meal was uncomfortable. Helen served the usual eggs and toast, putting on an act of forced happiness. She asked, watching me closely, "Seems like you're going to have quite a day ahead of you, right?" I gave a small nod, not wanting to look her in the eye. Although I wasn't hungry anymore, I made an effort to eat a little bit. Helen appeared satisfied. I saw a little smile play around her lips while she drank her coffee. Following our morning meal, I concocted a reason to leave the house. I mentioned to Helen that I was getting together with Leela for coffee and then quickly picked up my jacket. Her face shifted subtly for a brief moment, and she gripped her mug even more tightly. As soon as I was outside, I dialed Leela's number. "Julia, what's up?" She questioned me right away, picking up on the frantic tone in my voice. I told her I had to see her, my voice shaky. "It's something about Helen." "I believe she's attempting to." I found it impossible to complete that thought. The words felt too unbelievable. Leela pushed, wanting to know what she thought Helen was trying to do. "Just meet me at the coffee shop," I requested. When I got there, Leela was already at a table in the corner. Her eyebrows were drawn together in worry. I took a seat and told her everything, the emails, what Helen had said, and how I was feeling. "This is pretty bad, Julia," Leela declared as I finished speaking, her expression becoming serious. "The police need to know about this." "We'll get the proof we need, no matter how," she affirmed. Hearing her say that made me feel a bit more secure, something I hadn't experienced in ages. Leela's advice was to put a tiny camera in the kitchen so we could watch what Helen was doing and record any talks we happened to hear. We used the next hour to make plans. It felt like an intrusion, but the situation was dire, requiring drastic actions. As I made my way back to the house, I was on edge, but my determination was more powerful than ever. Helen may have believed she had the advantage, but she didn't realize how strong I was. When I got back, the house seemed chillier than before. Helen was in the living room, acting like she was reading a magazine, but the moment I stepped inside, she glanced up. She asked if my coffee date with Leela had been pleasant, her tone sounding overly saccharine. I just said yes and went toward my room, hopping to avoid further questioning. My pulse was racing, but I couldn't allow her to see even the slightest sign of apprehension. Once I was in my room, I locked the door and took out the small camera Leela had provided. Putting it up in the kitchen wasn't going to be a piece of cake, but there was no alternative. Sooner or later, Helen was bound to make a mistake, and when that happened, I would be prepared. That evening, I stayed up until I was certain Helen was fast asleep. As I slowly went downstairs, the house was strangely silent, the rug softening the sound of my footsteps. Once in the kitchen, I located an area behind some decorative jars where the camera would be concealed while still providing an unobstructed view of the entire space. The following days were strained. I went through my regular motions, compelling myself to act like everything was normal, as the camera quietly captured all the activity. Helen started to act in a more and more unpredictable manner. She became irritated with me over insignificant details, like leaving a light on or failing to shut a cabinet, and her phone conversations became more numerous. Her voice had a piercing quality, yet she kept it low. I made up my mind to examine the filmed segments one afternoon. I made sure the door was secure, hooked up the camera to my computer, and started playing back the recorded material. In the beginning, everything seemed normal. It was just Helen brewing tea or straightening up. However, I observed something on the third evening. Helen was standing by the kitchen work surface, cautiously tipping a white substance into a little container that had the word sugar on it. She stopped for a moment, looking in the direction of the entrance like she anticipated being caught, before returning the container to where it belonged. My insides churned with anxiety. It was more than just a feeling now. This was actually happening. I got in touch with Leela without delay. "I've got confirmation," I told her softly, my voice trembling. "What did you see?" "I have a feeling she's been messing with the food," I replied. I filmed her putting something into the sugar container. Leela's lack of response on the other end was palpable. After what felt like an eternity, she finally said, "Julia, you can't remain there." "Not for another night. Come over to my apartment." I paused for a second, casting my gaze towards the shut entrance to my room. "I can't simply walk out. She'll realize I suspect something if I go missing." "So what's your strategy then?" Leela inquired. I inhaled deeply, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on my mind. I'm going to compile all the evidence I can find, emails, recordings, absolutely everything, and then I'm heading to the authorities, but I require additional time. Be vigilant, Leela stated with certainty. Give me your word. I promise, I responded, even though the uneasy feeling in my gut indicated that this was far from concluded. The following day, I awoke to find Helen in a surprisingly cheerful disposition. In the kitchen, she was humming quietly to herself, a melody I recognized from yesterday, and even greeted me with a cheerful offer of breakfast. Lately, you've seemed really worn out, she commented, as she set down a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. I prepared this especially for you. You require sustenance. The aroma of the food nearly made me sick. I briefly looked at the sugar container on the countertop and then back at the plate. My heart began to race, yet I managed to keep my expression calm. Thanks, I mumbled, struggling to produce a small smile. While Helen kept a watchful eye on me, I faked taking a bite, carefully pushing the eggs around the plate. No sooner had she left the room than I snatched a plastic bag from the pantry and dumped the eggs into it. No matter what she'd put in them, I wasn't willing to take the chance. I stashed the bag in my handbag, intending to get it analyzed later. That afternoon, I went through the video recording once more. This time, I came across something that was even more disturbing. Helen was on the phone with Paul, walking back and forth in the kitchen as she talked. She's still around, Helen snapped, her tone filled with annoyance. I've tried everything I can think of to make things difficult for her, but she refuses to go. Paul's voice was quiet but understandable. Then you need to act faster and stop stalling. The attorney can't postpone things forever, and the longer she lives, the more difficult this is going to become. I gasped for air. As long as she is alive, it was no longer a matter of whether Helen intended to hurt me. The only question now was when. I devoted the remaining hours of the day to collecting all the proof I possibly could. The video recordings, the messages, and now the altered food, it all demonstrated a very clear and intentional plot to eliminate me. Later that evening, I dialed Leela's number again. I've got sufficient proof, I stated, my voice shaking slightly. I plan to visit the police tomorrow. That's great, she replied with conviction. And you're going to spend the night here with me, she added. No need to argue. I concurred, stuffing a small bag with necessities and the proof I had been gathering. I informed Helen that I was going to Leela's place for a girls' night in, trying to hide my worry with a nonchalant demeanor. She didn't question me, her mind seemed to be on something else entirely. Though, as I walked out of the house, what she said as I left made me uneasy. Have fun tonight, Julia, she mentioned, her tone playful but her eyes steely. One can never be certain when it might be one's last. That night at Leela's felt like the first time I had been able to breathe in weeks. Her comfortable apartment, filled with the scent of lavender and the sound of calm music, was completely different from Helen's stressful, frigid home. You're protected here, Leela mentioned as she passed me a cup of tea. We'll manage to get through this, she added. I agreed, holding the mug tightly as if it were the only thing keeping me afloat. I hope the police believe my story, I stated. What if they think I'm overreacting? I asked. You're not imagining things, Leela replied with certainty. You've handled everything perfectly. You have evidence more than sufficient to make them take action. We visited the police station the following morning. My chest hammered as I gave them the proof I had gathered. I'm talking about those emails, the video clips, and that sealed bag of scrambled eggs I had kept. I recounted the entire story for them. I told them about Helen's actions, the sensations I'd been feeling, and the scheme to poison me that I'd discovered. Detective Morales, a woman with a stern demeanor in her 40s, paid close attention as I spoke. She posed some direct and probing inquiries, but I couldn't detect any skepticism in her voice. You handled this well, Julia, she told me after going over the evidence I brought in. She went on to say, this is a grave matter and we will handle it accordingly. She informed me, I'll have the eggs analyzed for toxins, and we're going to secure a warrant so we can search the house. If your story holds true, Helen and whoever helped her won't be able to evade justice. A small spark of optimism ignited within me. Later that same day, Detective Morales reached out to me via telephone. You were correct, she informed me. The lab analysis of the food revealed the presence of a regulated chemical. If ingested in sufficient quantities, it could have been deadly. She continued with, "We are proceeding to execute the search warrant. Remain where you are and make sure you have your cell phone nearby. As soon as we have further information, we will let you know." The feeling of release was immense, although it didn't stick around long. Later that night, when I was still visiting Leela, Helen rang me. With an unsettlingly serene tone, she stated, "Julia, I trust you are enjoying spending time with your friend," she went on. "I just wanted to give you the heads up that I've made up my mind to make some alterations here at the house. There's no need for you to return this evening." I had seen to all the arrangements. A shiver went down my spine. What exactly was she implying by saying she'd handled everything? Without a moment's delay, I phoned Detective Morales to inform her about the phone call. Morales responded that she's on edge. She's aware that something is amiss, yet she's unsure of the extent of what you've discovered. Remain where you are. "We're on it." The following day, Morales phoned with new information. "We executed the search warrant earlier today," she announced. "We uncovered written communications with her partner, Paul, which supports your account, in addition to proof of financial manipulation within your father's estate. Helen and Paul are now both detained." I released a long-held breath that I didn't even know I was holding. "Is that really the end?" "It's done," Morales verified, "and your swift actions ensured your safety." I ended the call and collapsed onto Leela's sofa, feeling the stress of the past several weeks dissipate at last. Helen and Paul attempted to ruin me, but they underestimated how determined I was. I experienced a sense of liberation that I hadn't felt in what seemed like ages. The day following Helen and Paul's apprehension, I was relaxing in Leela's sitting room, browsing news articles that recounted the events. Phrases such as toxic scheme and inheritance scam jumped out from the screen, each being a grim reminder of just how close I was to losing everything: my well-being, my father's inheritance, and even my life. Leela exclaimed, "Check this out," as she lifted her phone. She had discovered a local news report that displayed a picture of Helen being led into the police station, her face showing a blend of rage and failure. Putting my phone down, I confessed that it all felt so unreal. I shared a home with her. Even as the problems became obvious, I still believed in her. Leela spoke with certainty, declaring that she had broken that trust in the deepest way possible. "Yet, Julia, you stood up for yourself. You didn't allow her to be victorious." I wished I could accept her words, but a part of me still carried the burden of all I had been deprived of. It wasn't merely my father. It was the false sense of family that Helen had constructed. The woman my father had loved and put his faith in had always been a complete unknown. Detective Morales got in touch that afternoon, providing me with further details. She said, "Julia, I figured you should be aware. Paul has come clean." He confessed to masterminding the entire plot, from the poisoning to the faked financial records. Helen's involvement was considerable, but he was the one in control. "So, does that suggest she's going to try and push the responsibility onto him?" was my question. Morales responded that it was a possibility. However, given the proof we have gathered, they will both be facing severe penalties. "You'll have to give evidence at the trial, but I'm confident they won't get away with this." I expressed my gratitude and ended the call, experiencing a peculiar combination of release and weariness. In the following weeks, I started putting the pieces of my life back together. It was far from simple. Going back to my dad's house felt like walking into the aftermath of a war, with memories of Helen's deceit permeating every room. To bring the space back to normal, I employed a cleaning company to get rid of anything that triggered thoughts of her. Slowly, the house began to feel like my own once more, a haven where I could exist without apprehension. I also had a meeting with my attorney so we could wrap up all the remaining legal aspects of the estate. Helen and Paul had tried to illegally move money out of my dad's bank accounts, though the records they left behind weren't very well hidden. The money was all being put back where it belonged, and my lawyer made it clear that my inheritance was safe. As the days bled into weeks, my thoughts drifted away from Helen and Paul, and I started pondering what I would do moving forward. For such a lengthy period, my energy had been devoted to just making it through all their manipulations. Now, I was presented with an opportunity to put my energy elsewhere. My life ahead. The day I gave my sworn statement against Helen and Paul, I walked confidently into the courtroom. Facing them again was tough, especially Helen with that cold stare of hers and Paul with his arrogant unconcern, but I wouldn't let their presence throw me off. The lawyer leading the case walked me through my statement, and I gave a complete rundown of everything they had done. The digital messages, the videos, the tainted food. With each thing I said, I felt a little more powerful, like I was getting back the control they'd tried to take from me. Helen didn't look at me directly, but Paul gave a little smile as I spoke, as if nothing that was happening was a big deal to him. But when the prosecutor presented all the concrete proof, even his self-assuredness seemed to fade. When my part was done, I walked out of the courtroom and into the cool afternoon air. A sense of lightness came over me, like the burden of their treachery had finally been released. Detective Morales came up to me, and I saw a slight smile on her face. "You did a good job, Julia. They will answer for their actions." I gave a nod, really taking in what she'd said. Justice involved more than just punishment. It was really about finding a sense of finality. It meant realizing that I had done everything within my power to shield myself and uphold the memory of my father. Leaving the courthouse behind me, I understood that I would never again allow someone to exploit me. Sometime after the trial ended, I found myself in my father's study, the sun shining brightly through the panes. The scent of aged books and cedarwood lingered in the air, a gentle echo of him that brought me comfort. A picture of us both from the day I graduated college rested on the desk in its frame. I lifted the photo, tracing the frame's perimeter with my fingers. "I actually accomplished it, Dad," I murmured softly. "They are no longer here. They are incapable of harming either one of us going forward." The feeling in the house had transformed. It felt more bright, more secure. Now it represented so much more than just walls and a roof. It was finally under my control. I experienced a profound sense of tranquility. I resolved to commemorate my dad's life by utilizing the house in a way that would bring good to others. I contacted charities in the local area, suggesting we hold small gatherings and fundraising activities in his honor. Giving back to the community had always been important to him, and it felt as if this was how I could ensure his legacy lived on. One evening, as I stood there on the porch at the rear of the house observing the setting sun, Leela appeared with a couple glasses of wine. She lifted her glass, saying, "Here's to new chapters." "To a sense of liberation," I answered back, touching my glass to hers. While the sky slowly transformed into different hues of pinks and oranges, a realization dawned on me. Even though Helen and Paul attempted to destroy me, they ultimately only succeeded in reinforcing my spirit. The future in front of me was mine to craft, and I was absolutely intent on making something valuable of it.